This is Robert Kraft, and I'm your host on Planet MicroCap. And joining me right now is Martin Shen. He's the president and CEO of FingerMotion. It's a publicly traded company. The symbol is FNGR on NASDAQ. And FingerMotion will be presenting at our upcoming investor conference, Planet MicroCap Showcase Vegas, in partnership with MicroCap Club, taking place April 22 through 24, 2025 at the Paris Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. For more information to register to meet Martin, to see his presentation, please register for our in-person event at planetmicrocapshowcase.com. And with that, Martin, good to see you, man. How you doing?
Oh, great. It's good to be back. Good to see you again as well. And thanks so much for taking the time to do this. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's good to have you on here. And listen, we have a lot to talk about. I'm sure we were talking offline, you know where we're going with this, but for those that don't know the FingerMotion story, can you give us that quick overview of the company and then we'll go from there?
Sure. Absolutely. So obviously, yes, FingerMotion, a US company, NASDAQ listed, but our operations are within China. We started off as a payment processor for China Mobile and China Unicom. And so we do have the luxury of a very massive playground. I think it's 1.5 billion user accounts. So there's a large field, I guess, that we work with there. We got into payment processing, handling the payments for those customers. Then we got into SMS, text messaging bundling. But what I think really our growth has always been is our data side. We have the license to go in and study the user data for those telcos. We don't own the data, right? And the data has already been scrubbed for anonymity and privacy. But we do have somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000, 3,000 different demographic data points. And it's all that data that we've been working with the last few years to grow our big data arm, Sapientus, which is the division that we call it. And now we're at a point where we're very comfortable in the insurtech space, working with Munich Re, and we're looking to not only grow that business in insurtech and risk scoring and precise marketing, but also trying to take that outside of China. And we're going to work primarily first in Southeast Asia, Thailand, and Vietnam, and all that sort of stuff. So very
All right.
excited about that.
Absolutely. All right. So now let's address some of the elephants in the room here. So we'll start with tariff situation. Listen, it's
Sure.
all very fluid. It's very difficult to predict where the wind is kind of blowing and what will happen here and whatnot. And I mean, not only tariffs, insurtech in China, you know how some US investors were like, I don't even know how to properly put my head around this, both opportunity and being able to just trust with there's so much stuff. So when you're talking to US investors and they're quickly seeing, between China, the short report from 2 years ago, all this stuff, like how do you address it? What goes through your mind? How should I think about FingerMotion, at this point in
Yeah.
its life cycle?
Well, I think if we fall back to the fundamentals, let's say of our financial statements, our growth in our revenue and certainly our growth in our margins is something that I think investors can look to and say, okay, there's good growth in the company, there's stable stuff. I think one thing I should also mention is that we have a very large project, an emergency response program that's been mandated by the government, and we are providing the platform for the entire program. And that's going to obviously, given the size and scope of something like that, where in essence, every city, every town, every village has to have personnel, equipment, vehicles in place to respond to any disasters. That's a very big thing for us, and that another revenue driver that could, be very, very significant for us down the road. So with the data arm and the emergency response program, those are big revenue drivers. And again, I fall back to the financial statements. And, talking about the elephant in the room, the tariffs, obviously that's a big, political situation, not just obviously the figures of the tariffs themselves, but the whole socioeconomic scope and, this kind of scrutiny and the relationships between the two countries. What we always do is, we put our head down. And currently, because we are China-centric, we aren't necessarily affected by the cross-border issues that the tariffs might imply. Now, that doesn't go obviously addressing, let's say, the equipment that we might need to bring in, if that is, let's say US made. If it's, foreign made, then, we're okay. But that's something that we're just going to have to, cross when we get there. But again, for investors, and I've met a number of investors out there and potential investors and shareholders, and they seem, buoyed by the fact that, we do have our financial statements that are coming out shortly, and, they're happy about the growth of the company itself. in insurtech and data, and obviously with this emergency response program. It's hard for a company like us to make any comments about the political side of things because honestly, we don't really know what's going to happen. So that's that.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And also for full disclosure, we're recording this on Tuesday, April 15, 2025. So just in case this, financials come out, after or before this comes out, just want to make sure, we're not
Yeah.
talking about that here today.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing that, just addressing another elephant in the room. Yeah, you took a look at the balance sheet. Companies, operating at a loss. It's kind of grown a little bit quarter over quarter, and I mean, what do you say to investors that are looking at this and think to them, sorry, they're clearly going to have to continue to raise money, dilute, like what's the path to profitability here, as the losses continue to grow?
Yeah, great question. I think again, the company, the different divisions that I just referenced to, the big data arm, Sapientus, and our ERP will be what we think will be our paths to profitability down the road. We did take some financing to the end of 2024 via Roth Capital, and that was very helpful to kind of get us going on that path. But we will need to raise more money, particularly with the ERP program, because that is quite capital intensive. We got to bring in these vehicles. We got to bring in all this equipment and, set out the platform within all of it before we can push it back out to the different cities that order it. So that'll take some capital infusion for that to kind of get going and kick that off. But once we get that rolling and the economies of scale of building the different vehicles and getting those orders in and rolling through that, we think that that's the path to profitability, and that's something that we're happy to share with potential investors and shareholders out there.
All right, my final question for you, Martin. I say this with all due respect. Okay, I know you've been hitting it. I appreciate it. This is one of our
Yeah.
quick hitters as well. What are some KPIs or things that potential investor or anybody watching this can look towards that you're guiding them and say, hey, I know you're probably sketched out, but you take one Google search of us, you find this, find that, that you might be a little sketched out. What are some things that you point them to say, all right, here's some data points, or here's some things that you can look at so that we show like, look, we're not just another uh, U.S. listed China-based company that might not, like what do you do? What
Yeah.
do you send them?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing we mentioned, again, like you just said, we are, NASDAQ listed, Delaware domiciled. So that in essence should provide some comfort to potential investors. Say, okay, we've got the rigors and the regulations and the reporting requirements that NASDAQ requires, gives them that kind of comfort, that the statements are audited and all that sort of stuff, and gives them the comfort of the financial statements themselves. Also, the fact that, we are trying to get outside of being so China centric. And we understand that. And that wouldn't have been any different even if we didn't have all this tariff and relationship and socioeconomic thing that happened around the world. We've always been trying to expand outside of insurtech and outside of the jurisdiction of China. And that's just a growth path for the country, for our company. So if those things kind of come to fruition, then you can see that, we do have these kind of targets and a strategy in place to help the company grow and the direction in which we want to lead it for growth in the future. So hopefully that provides them with some comfort down the road.
All right, I appreciate it, Martin. Well, with that, where can our audience go and find more information on FingerMotion?
Yeah, so come to our website, fingermotion.com. We'll give the details. Obviously, past interviews like this is also on there as well. Our SEC filings and other filings that we had to do are all there. And then obviously through Skyline as well, who are our IR company, and they can provide more questions and answers if you need them.
Very good. Well, Martin, thank you for joining me today. Really do appreciate it. Good luck, stay safe, and I'll see you in Vegas.
Perfect. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.